going to talk about. I know on the agenda here, there's been some discussion about, how do you deal with concerns about fraud, concerns about information, just general concerns, the public has as a whole. And from the agency's perspective, we think it's really important to just stick to the facts. And I'll give you an example. What I mean by that is I make a statement like elections are safe and secure in Wisconsin. That's a subjective statement, right? That is a statement of opinion. And whether I believe it or not, I may very well believe that. That is a subjective statement. And frankly, at the Elections Commission, we try to avoid saying things like that, if at all possible, because the people who are concerned about elections integrity have genuine concerns, and they're based on things that they have heard that are really, frankly, quite frightening if they are true. And so we're not in a position where we are shutting off segment of our audience, segment of our population, saying your concerns are not important to us, right? We're going to set you aside and instead talk about something. And I do genuinely believe it's important that everyone's no matter where. With that, introduce yourself.
I'm Lisa Freiberg, Fond du Lac County Clerk, and as I was told, I've been in the position as County Clerk for 15 years now, and elections have changed dramatically in the 15 years. In the 25 years I've been in the County Clerk's office. Working as the county, in my case, I have 21 towns, 9 villages, and 3 cities. Fond du Lac County has a population of over 104,000 citizens in the county for the last census, give or take. And right now, I have 64,000 registered voters right now. However, according to the census, we have over 83,000 that are eligible to be voters. So we have 20,000 people somewhere in our county that chose not to be registered voters, which is always that number that you're working with. With elections like the one coming up next week, we are seeing people registering to vote that have never voted. And we're not talking just an 18 or a 21-year-old person in the 40s, 50s, and 60s because of how important elections are. We are seeing people that haven't voted in 4 to 7 years and have to re-register to vote because in Wisconsin, another interesting thing is if you haven't voted in 4 years, you do get a postcard that says, hey, you haven't voted in 4 years. Do you still want to remain on the voter list? Well, we all know what people do with a postcard. They throw it in the garbage can, and then when they show up at the clerk's office, which we're going through right now, well, I voted. Why am I not on that list? Well, you haven't voted for a while, and all that information is public by going on the My Vote website. My Vote website. Where people can look to see where the voter status is. Another thing in Wisconsin that's always unique is same-day registration. With our election coming up next week, my municipal clerks and statewide is going to be crazy. We're seeing that already with people that are registering to vote this week. They're coming out of the woodwork, and in my experience of being clerk all these years, I'm feeling this type of election being the same as the Governor Walker recall. We saw people that hadn't voted in years. We saw people angry. We saw people that want to get out and get their vote to count. So this is where, on the local level, we have to accommodate this. Uniqueness in Fond du Lac County, we might be number 20 for population in the state of Wisconsin, but all my people are rural. I have 21 towns and not a single full-time clerk. Makes it very, very challenging for the people yelling at me at 4 o'clock this afternoon at the counter because my biggest town doesn't have absentee voting during the day. They came down to the government center wanting to absentee vote, and I say you have to go to the local level. So that is the challenge in Wisconsin, that people in these small towns and villages, I have 9 villages, and I think I have 3 full-time clerks with my villages also. And as I was told just the other day from my district attorney, Well, that's not fair because in bigger counties, they can go to the clerk's office Monday through Friday between 7:30, 7:45, 8 o'clock until 5 o'clock. But in Fond du Lac County, they have to make appointments. That's not unique when you look at, okay, this is just a small, or Fond du Lac County, people say, oh, big county, but rural. But you start heading more north, you run into those obstacles. The mailing, we have that option in Wisconsin, there's the absentee voting, but sadly, we had an election on February 21st, and up until last week, we were still receiving absentee ballots that were postmarked before February 21st, but they get to our municipal clerks. So if anybody works for the post office in here, I'm sorry, but the system isn't working. The system is simply not working for mail-in ballots, and that is our future. Whether people like it or not, people like absentee voting. I have people that will be at different places that I go and speak at. Oh, got to get rid of absentee voting. A couple days later, they're across the hall absentee voting. I'm not going to point my finger at them, but yet they're saying we can't do it. It is the thing of the future. The younger generation likes it. Everybody is busy. I ask why they like it. I ask why they sign up for it. Charlie has guitar lessons. This person has to be at that. I have 3 kids. I remember the running around, but I like to vote in person. Personally, as the county clerk, I take the time on election day, even though I'm not sure if I'm going to have that time during the day, but I vote in person. But I got kids, I got my kids' friends, and they like the convenience of absentee voting, and it is allowed in Wisconsin. That would take a legislative change. Another just quick item I want to say, some things, just like anybody in your job or rules, I don't necessarily like what I have to do. However, I don't have the authority to change it. That is legislative. All my duties as county clerk include being called the chief election official of Fond du Lac County or our respective counties, which was given to us by Governor Walker. That title is all by the state statutes, and most of the time, including our election, our Bible on the day of elections, with every polling place in Wisconsin should have one of these. And if you go through it, the state statutes are all in there on why we do what we do. So with that.
And I'm going to keep reminding myself and I'll remind all of our panelists that we do have people watching this online, so we need to try to speak very close to the microphone. Something I'd like to start off with, and first of all, I want to remind you all that you should have note cards and pens that for you, and we'd like to encourage you to write out any questions you might have throughout the night. That we'll take a look and try to get to as many of those as we can. We know we will probably have more than we can get to, but we will do our best. So for starters, I'd like to just ask about sort of safeguards in general. So what are some of the common concerns that you do hear from voters who are wondering about voter intimidation, people voting more than once, people voting who aren't eligible to vote? What kind of safeguards exist to keep those things from happening, and how do they function in the state here?
I can probably start off, and then Lisa, I'm sure, has more firsthand experience about this topic. But and it is a hot topic in the state of Wisconsin. I think we are in an environment where there is a lot of tension between observers who have a lawful right to observe the process of the election and want to ensure that they have adequate access to really see what's going on in the polling place. And we also have, of course, voters who are maybe concerned about someone looking over their shoulder or seeing who they're voting for or getting in the way of the process. And we have poll workers, right, who are primarily just focused on trying to make sure the election flows smoothly. And certainly over the course of the last year or two, we have seen that tension between observers on the one hand and voters and sometimes poll workers on the other hand. And right now, that is one of the leading topics of the Elections Commission, the 6-member body, is considering. The commission recently directed the staff to form an advisory body consisting of representatives from all across the state, from both political parties and from many civic organizations such as Disability Rights Wisconsin, to consider observer rules in Wisconsin and how observer rules in Wisconsin can be modified to ensure everyone's rights are protected. And more importantly, but also importantly, to ensure that those observer rules are captured in an administrative, because that does not currently exist in Wisconsin. The statute says what it says. As we all know, the statutes are often very limited and don't cover a conceivable situation, and so it's often left to municipal and county clerks or even chief inspectors at the polling place to make decisions about what's adequate access for the observer or what's not. And we want to try to help clarify those rules through an administrative rule in order to reduce the conflict.
Basically the same thing, just trying to put my thoughts together. I welcome observers, and we don't see a lot of observers in Fond du Lac County. I know everybody focuses on that Milwaukee and Dane County area, but we welcome them. When we get good observers, I try talking them into being election officials. I'll have observers that will call me and say, well, I want to touch. Well, how about this? I have a job for you. You can be an election official. And some of the best observers have been great election officials. We are losing election officials. If you look at the average age of our election officials, these great people that have been doing it for 40 and 50 years, we need to start looking at new people. 2020 opened our eyes to that. I know we all remember April of 2020. I certainly remember it because we were told the day before the election at about 5 o'clock at night that the election was canceled. I'm like, well, yeah, the election isn't going to be canceled in Wisconsin. I was on the phone calling every legislator that would listen to me and everything else. And then an hour or two later, the election was back on. But we had so many people. I had phone calls from sons and daughters of mom who's been an election official for 40 years, and they didn't want their dear loved mom or dad to be working in the polls. We got the National Guard that time to come in and help. And from the National Guard, I even have a couple people that are now election officials. But we need younger people to step up and be part of it. Since then, I've talked to many different people about, I got involved into a council for a little bit that was allowing at your job that you didn't lose vacation days and able to work elections and at our workplaces. We actually have that. We offer that at Fond du Lac County. We were allowing people that work for Fond du Lac County to work at their municipality and they didn't lose a vacation day. Once again, going back to my municipal clerks, the majority of them have a full-time job. This basically all of them. They get 2 weeks of vacation. Last year in Fond du Lac County, we had 5 elections because we had 1 special election. That's 1 week of somebody's vacation time to do part of this. So back to the actual question about intimidation though. It's difficult because with people being felons, we get lists of people being on that. We count on the public to challenge. We count on the public to be observers. And if they see wrongdoing, we need to know. I have a phenomenal relationship with the sheriff and the district attorney in Fond du Lac County and my county judges. We are all together a week before elections or longer. They come to my trainings on trainings that I do for our election officials. Both the district attorney and the sheriff does. If they see anything that's going on that shouldn't be going on in elections, they need to call 911, no matter what, even if it turns out to be something small. We want our voters to be safe and in that secure time period to be able to vote. Do we miss things? Absolutely. Because once again, it's human error. Who runs our elections? Humans. And do they make errors? Absolutely. But we try to learn from these errors and hope it's not going to be something huge in any scenario.
Lisa, can you talk a little bit more about the training that election workers receive?
Well, start out with, I am state certified to do election training throughout the state, which would be chief inspector training, and I have gone to other counties to do it. It is an option now to do it online. I'm old fashioned. I think election training needs to be done in person. But that is my opinion. So I offer in-person training. Before elections, I offer that chief inspector training because the interesting part in Wisconsin again is on election day, the municipal clerk does not run elections. The chief inspector runs elections. So that is somebody that a couple times a year, this year 2 times, will be running elections. And once again, probably is, well, it is somebody appointed by the municipal clerk or the municipality. So they're not necessarily working in elections. So they need to have 6 hours of training every other year. So in Fond du Lac County, we do 3 hours of chief inspector training, which I do offer. And then before every big election, I have a 2-hour training, and we go through the piles and piles of paperwork that need to be filled out on election day. We go through them little by little. I also invite all election officials, and that's right down to that, maybe that person that is giving you, saying hi, and in some polling places, what door you go into, if it's divided by alphabet or something. I invite all of them. We do a little bit of a Cracker Barrel, and everybody tells their story and things that they've seen or done. And sometimes I'm just rolling my shoulders and we talk about those scenarios. Once again, these are great people that give up their time on a full day on a Tuesday in February and April and August and November, but we talk about that. There is other types of online training they can take, but these are the laws, but it's always remembering in the polling place what needs to happen on election day.
A reminder, if anyone has questions they'd like to submit, these folks are going to be walking around for you. Just wave a card, wave your arm, and we'll take a look at those. In the meantime, you both talked a little bit about the decentralized nature of our election administration system. Talk a little bit more, just breaking down kind of the pros and cons, good and bad, of the way that our state works in that regard.
This is a tough one for me because even before I became county clerk, we had a forward-thinking county clerk prior to me that I was blessed to work for 10 years. And we foresaw that in our county, as much as we want to move forward and everything, that maybe like absentee voting should be done, being offered on the county level even. And being able to come into the county to do absentee voting, and other county clerks are going to be going, no, no, no. But in our rural areas where we don't have people, our towns, for instance, cannot afford a full-time clerk and giving benefits for them. If you go on to the municipal clerk website right now, you will be able to find a job as a municipal clerk anywhere in the state of Wisconsin. Nobody wants the jobs. County clerks are leaving left and right also, fortunately at retirement ages or just are done with elections. It's a tough job. So some being on the local level, it is very, very difficult. I have some clerks that just say, Lisa, just take care of it. In our county, we reconcile all 30 towns and villages. We're crazy. We do all the absentee ballots in the system for all 21 towns and 9 villages, because once again, we don't have full-time clerks to do it. So every day they send me their absentee ballot log, we go into the system and do all the tracking on their behalf. Being on the county level, it might be a little bit easier, but I don't have the answer on how that could be done either.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think the burden is placed, one of the disadvantages of the decentralized system is the burden is placed on small town. The burden is placed on small town clerks, particularly part-time clerks across the state, because we ask so much of them, and oftentimes they're working 6 hours a week, and you just can't do it all in 6 hours a week. I think the jurisdictions that are most successful tend to have great support from the counties, like Lisa, but certainly that's not the case everywhere. I think one of the advantages of it, to make sure we do highlight an advantage of the decentralized environment, is that firsthand knowledge of the community. And that's one big advantage of municipal clerks. They know their voters, they know the residents. Oftentimes grew up with them. So it's a much more personal relationship and much more personal level of support. That probably obviously carry over to some extent in larger cities.
Robert, I don't know if you'll have an answer for this, but this is a question directed at Lisa, and it's kind of a good piggyback on that. You have a magic wand, this is from the audience. You have a magic wand and you can wave it and have the legislature change rules and laws regarding elections in the process. What would change?
Oh, my.
Maybe a short list.
I didn't bring that list along, however. Oh, well, first of all, there would be, well, boy. Well. I'm sorry, I didn't have.
We can come back to.
Let me,
Absolutely.
you go.
Count it.
Well, I mean, I'm all about, back in before COVID, we foresaw this coming. We saw the absentee, picking up in 2019 already, and, Representative Janelle Branchen brought up with her Waukesha County clerks processing ballots on Monday before the election. And, you know, we went back and forth on a lot of things, on some of the laws of that. And then COVID came, but if only we could have settled on that before that. What actually happened in April of 2020, the week after the election, if any of you remember, on that election night, we stopped at 8 o'clock, or whoever was in line. We did not tabulate the ballots that night because people had until the Thursday, or was it, no, the following Monday. The following Monday. So statewide, and we talk, trust me, we talk, nowhere in the state, they actually shut everything down. And that following Monday, all the absentee ballots that did come in were put into the machine to be processed, and then first the total button was given. So that was a whole week later. And I said, see, we actually could do it. If we could process ballots on the Monday, just absentee, no total button would be pushed. We could take first of all, we could have observers. We need observers during that absentee time. We need people to be watching that processing of absentee ballots. That is something I truly believe. We don't have enough observers. We don't have enough people at our polling places. That is why we are seeing different time periods on that Tuesday of when, in our big elections, of when we're having those results come in. That is why we are seeing the big dump at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. Just think, if we could process those absentee ballots on Monday, and that needs to be done during a certain time period. It needs to start like at 7 a.m. on Monday, and you go up until 8 p.m. on Monday. That's it, no more. If you don't get done, we finish it on Tuesday. But the stress that would take off our election officials and the unintentional human errors that happen on election day because of their stress of having to process. I talked to my town of Fond du Lac clerk today. She's at 250 absentee ballots for next Tuesday already. That is a big town. They have one tabulator in there. They have about 11 to 13 people working, but you have to understand, while there's people voting there on that day, they need to still say Lisa Freiberg, 123 Main Street, Fond du Lac. When you're just an absentee voter, they need to state, your election official is stating your name and address out loud, just like as if you were there, because when you come into a polling place in Wisconsin, you must state your name and address. The time that is taking on Tuesday, and we wouldn't have to have so many people because our towns and villages and cities are finding it harder and harder. Look outside, what do we got out there? Wasn't that a great surprise on Saturday? We have so many of our dedicated election officials that are still down as snowbirds down in Florida. And I know just in the city of Fond du Lac alone that she's had so many people that unable to work. And as we are seeing more and more interest in this election, she's looking for more and more people to have to work. And I'm going to be sending the email to my towns and villages. You better get some extra people available next week. So
Another audience question. If our election process has remained largely stable for so long, to what do you attribute the sharp rise of distrust in the process?
go, you sir.
Okay, I'll go.
Yep.
From
From the state level.
Well, I think the bottom line, election results in 2020 were called into question. There were a lot of stories of things gone wrong. Now, whether those stories are true or not, we can argue till the cows come home. But what is a fact is there were a lot of stories about things gone wrong, and that I think planted the seed that has created all of the concern that you see today and that you've seen over the course of the last 2 years or so.
I think it even goes back to 2016 when we did have the statewide recount. It was the Green Party that was able to come up, and it wasn't even one of the Republicans or Democrats. It was the next party down, the Green Party, that brought it up, and the questions that did arise, the scenarios that were put in with that recount. I don't think a lot of things were even rectified even back in 2016. And it just kind of grew when it got to 2020, and the recounts that were in between and went on and on. The media doesn't help matters any. And I don't, honestly, going into our next year, it's, having forums, agree to disagree, working together. Where's that common ground that we can start working and rebuilding the trust? But I think we're far from that right now, and I'm hoping that that starts getting closer together before the presidential.
I wanted to ask about the transparency of the process, but we also got a question asking in particular if there could be ways to use technology to provide more transparency, whether that might be live streaming from a polling place, something like that, to make it easier to observe elections. So maybe to speak generally about the transparency, what people are able to observe, what they're able to verify, and if anything additional could be done to expand that.
Yeah, I can speak about it generally, and then also I can speak to the technology point there, which I think is interesting. I think generally speaking, one of the things that not a lot of folks recognize is that large swaths of the process are transparent. In other words, you can observe everything from equipment testing to ballot counting. Where it becomes tricky is in the practical application of that transparency. And I talked a little bit about the observer challenge that we've had in some elections, where when you have high demand, when a lot of observers want to get into a polling place, and the poll worker, the chief inspector, or the municipal clerk, wants to make sure they're not in the way, and ends up tucking them in a corner, and then those people feel like they didn't have an adequate opportunity to observe. So I think although statute allows for a great deal of transparency, I think it's also incumbent on elected officials at all levels to ensure that people have the right to exercise that opportunity.
Absolutely. The transparency, just as thinking about that, there's so much transparency. They can observe the absentee voting, election day, end of the night process, the municipal canvass, the county canvass. County canvass, we never see anybody at our county canvass. Nobody comes in even to question where are these numbers coming from. It's all put out when it's going to be. The times we do see people is usually when there's a close election on the state level or the federal level, and the first thing they say to us is, can you do that first, and then you can go back and do your county or local. And it's like, no, you're going to sit here through this entire process to see what we actually do to certify these elections, because this is very, very important. That is a very important part, is how are these results being certified? Another transparency is every polling place in this state must do a public test on their machines, which is going on this week. It is published in the paper. You can make that simple phone call to your municipal clerk, because I know nobody reads the paper, but once again, there's one of them we could get rid of, but by not using, sorry for those in the media, but putting it on our websites. Our municipalities and counties, we spend so much money putting things in newspapers that nobody reads, but yet that is required. But putting it on the website, and simply by our constituents giving a call. When is that public test on the machine? You can actually see what that process is, see the different scenarios on how the machine is being used, the tabulator is being used. But there is so much transparency involved. And yet when I tell people, were you there at the end of the night? No, you can't touch things, but you can see what the process is even when our election officials. One thing that is very important to know is the election officials tidy everything up. They put things in sealed bins, including the ballots. They bring it to the county level the next day. On the county level, if somebody says, well, I don't think they counted the ballots right that night, the machine was off, this and that, the poll book didn't match the machine, you should check that out, Lisa. I don't have the authority. The county clerk does not have the authority to touch any of those returns, those ballot returns, until that election is certified. So when I get that phone call, it's, I don't know. And yeah, it sounds really, why don't you know, Lisa? Because with the chain of custody, with everything that comes to us, and trust me, everybody is signing everything time and time again with the paperwork. And that's what we all find out at a recount, when we have to take everything apart on election day and go through things item by item.
On the technology piece, I just comment on that. I think that is an interesting question, and something that jurisdictions across the country are starting to look at. I actually just came back from Broward County, Florida, and looking at their election systems, and the system that they had set up for election observers in the county was really fascinating. It relied on technology and closed circuit cameras to actually just depict on large screens, and you're right there with them. They're not in another room. They're not across town. You're in the same room with the cameras. But the cameras allow the observers to really zoom in and see very clearly, right, each ballot, for example, in the case of a recount, or to see exactly what the poll workers are doing. But the catch, of course, with all that fancy technology, it costs money. And so, particularly given the way this elections are conducted at the municipal level here, something like that would be a challenge for municipal governments. Would require some kind of grants.
Well, we've gone a little bit over this section, but I do have one more question from the audience, and I think you can answer relatively quickly before we move on, and that's just how clerks and poll workers are chosen. Is there a partisan balance? Just kind of break that down real quick.
Okay, well, there should be, and that is what is considered. Election officials, the parties are to give lists to the municipalities in odd years. So this fall, the two main parties, the Republicans and Democrats, submit those lists to their municipalities if they are interested in being an election official. From that, the clerk then takes those names to their municipal board in December, and then they work from that list. We don't see a lot of people on those lists in our county. I know go back to Milwaukee and Dane County, they have lists and lists, but in talking to a lot of county clerks, they don't usually get lists. And then from there, it is just trying to get it out into the public. The town I live in, which is just right over the county line, we simply cannot find election officials. It's very difficult. We have enough just to get through each election, but it's a town, it's a farming community, but people just don't even want to get involved anymore. And it's really, really sad. Working people needing to be places, everything else. So it is a challenge for a lot of our municipalities, sadly, to get people that will want to work at these polling locations. The law did change now a couple of years ago, where fortunately we can take people from other municipalities. They must live in their county. They can't be the chief inspector. So I've been able to start helping out. I can't do it because I don't have that authority. But when I know of some good election officials, and Maggie doesn't need them in the city of Fond du Lac, that I can move them around the county a little bit. So that has given us a little bit more widening of doors on that. One other thing I wanted to bring up, a lot of our municipal clerks don't even live in their municipalities anymore. They're now appointed clerks. And we're seeing a lot of municipal clerks that are serving actually 2 different municipalities because there's a shortage of them and they're willing to work 2 different municipalities for their job.
Well, thank you, Lisa and Robert, for your insights. We're gonna move on to the election law and politics portion of the panel. So we'll bring up Tokaji and Aaron Weinschenk to talk a little bit about that. Dan Tokaji is the Dean of the University of Wisconsin Law School. As Dean, he serves as the Chief Academic and Executive Officer of the school, responsibility for faculty and staff development, personnel oversight, strategic planning and institutional vision, fundraising, budget planning and management, curriculum, and student academic affairs. He has a bachelor's degree from Harvard and a law degree from Yale. And Aaron Weinschenk is the Ben J. and Joyce Rosenberg Professor of Political Science and Chair of Political Science at UW Green Bay. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin Green Bay and a master's degree in PhD from UW Milwaukee. Once again, you've got cards at your tables, pens at your tables, just fill them out, wave your hand, and we'll have people walking around to get audience questions. But to kick us off, broad question, do you think the mechanics of voting and vote counting is overly political in Wisconsin? Easy.
I think it's become political everywhere, right? Like, it's not unique to Wisconsin. It has to, if you rewind time, people weren't talking about election fraud in previous elections to the extent that they were now. But when somebody talks about it and raises it to the level of national politics, I think people grasp onto it. And I agree with what the elections administrator had to say, that if you just say your concerns aren't valid, that's not the right way forward, right? You need to actually dissect them and look at what the evidence is. And so I do think it has become political, and I think the real concern for me is people bringing cases forward, bringing cases to local government boards, but there's no evidence. I serve on the City of Green Bay's Ethics Board. In fact, I'm the vice chair. We've had cases brought to us regarding the election that are incomplete, that don't have the necessary information to be a valid complaint, or that make claims that there's no evidence for, right? Like just saying, I heard somebody say this is not satisfying evidence and won't be in any court. So I do have concerns about the level of politicization and the extent to which people are bringing cases forward that are really just designed to gum up the system. Should we have ways for people to bring things forward? Absolutely, we need that in every system. But I think a lot of them are not being made in good faith.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank the Carter Center and Thompson Center for co-sponsoring this event, and Dr. Oshkosh for being our host this evening. Chancellor, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's my first time here in Oshkosh, and I guess I'm going to answer a slightly different question than the one you asked, which is whether elections and the administration of elections are overly political, not just in Wisconsin, but nationally. My answer to that question is yeah. I've actually been writing about this for a long time. So before I became dean of law school here, I was an election law professor at our state, teaching there since 2003. So I've been in this for 20 years, and I've been writing about this for almost as long. The Carter Center does a lot of internet around the world on running elections. You know, when you talk to people about how elections are run in the United States, there are a lot of good things about our system. But one of the really weird things to people who are from other countries is that in the vast majority of the states, you have a partisan election official. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean somebody who's elected as a representative of their party. That's how they got elected into office. Who's the Secretary of State? Who's the state's chief election? Most other countries, it's a little nutty because you ought to have people who are at least to some degree insulated from the political process, who are the state's chief election official. But that is the system we've had in the United States and have had for a long time. And I do think it is a problem when it comes to public trust. You know, I've been advocating for quite a long time that we should have a different kind of system, a more bipartisan or non-partisan system. But you know, it's very hard to move away from the kind of system where people are used to. I think that in most places things are actually much better at the local level, right? Where you have either nonpartisan official or bipartisan boards who are running elections. And one of the things I've seen that is a really favorable development over the past 20 years is the degree of professionalism at the local level increased dramatically. And you know, as you heard earlier, mistakes are always going to happen. There is no such thing as a perfect election. But by and large, over my 20 years in this business, I have seen the competency and the professionalism of those running elections, especially at the local level.
You can both take a crack at this, but Dan, you did a lot of work on the Government Accountability Board, studying that kind of, and it's the previous iteration of our election administration in Wisconsin, before the relatively newly created Ethics and Elections Commissions. Can you talk about the impact of shifting away from GAB back to this sort of two-pronged commission approach?
Yeah. Well, so I was a fan, I think it's fair to say, of the structure of the Government Accountability Board. You know, here in Wisconsin, we're really pretty much the only example of a genuinely nonpartisan entity at the state level. Like there's some examples of that at the local level. Something that lots of other countries, as I mentioned earlier, have a genuinely nonpartisan election authority. You know, it wasn't a part of our constitution. There's a really interesting report on the history of the Government Accountability Board that came out by some scholars at Princeton University just a few weeks ago, which I've come to your attention. You know, bottom line, as I was saying, this is the Government Accountability Board, but in the grand scheme of things, we've got more or less a bipartisan system at the state level here, which I think is better than what most other states have, which is a single party, either Democrat or Republican, having the office of chief election official and, you know, really a very important say in what decisions get made. There's an inherent conflict of interest built into that kind of role, because on the one hand, when you're elected as a representative of your party, you have in the Senate to serve your party's interests, while at the same time, as an election official, your obligation is to be impartial, and you know, there's just an inherent conflict of interest in that kind of.
Can you speak, either of you, about just broadly about the role that courts play in the election system and what part they play in particularly keeping elections safe and secure?
Yeah, I think we do not want courts deciding elections, and judges generally don't want to decide elections. As I said before, we definitely want there to be a place where people can appeal if there's something that's gone wrong from the local level all the way up to the federal level. But we want a system where the winner of the election is decided at the ballot box, not by judges. And judges are really reluctant to do that across the United States.
So maybe because I'm a lawyer and a law professor, I have maybe a little bit of a different perspective on this. I think courts have a really important role to play in overseeing our election process and making sure that our elections are conducted in accordance with the law. Most of the law that comes to our elections, by the way, not federal law, mostly state law, with a thin overlay of federal law, including the Voting Rights Act, National Voter Registration Act, Help America Vote Act. You know, I often say election administration in the United States is mostly a matter of state law and local practice. We have not just 50 election systems in this country, but literally thousands for each of the counties in some places like Wisconsin, municipalities that are responsible for running elections. Courts play an important role in this process, in my view. You know, we've seen an increase since starting with the 2000 elections, the number of cases that are filed by both sides, by both Democrats and Republicans, and private groups aligned with both sides. You know, it was formerly in the maybe low 100s or even less than that per election cycle. Nowadays, it's well over 300, maybe 400 in in 2020 election. And look, I'm a lawyer, so take that for what it's worth. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. People are filing lawsuits when they believe their legal rights have been violated. Those lawsuits should be supported by, reasonable legal arguments and evidence. But, that's part of what courts are for. When there are disputes over whether the law is being followed, courts do have a role to play. And, for those who don't like it, you can blame it in part on Bush versus Gore. You may or may not have liked the results back in the 2000 election when the court intervened under the Equal Protection Clause. But, it sends a signal out there that the courts are open for business. And I think that is a good thing. One of the things the founding fathers believed is that, if you have power that's unchecked, well, it tends to get corrupted, right? And one of the useful functions courts do that our separation of powers in our government does, it provides a check, right? If you believe that election officials or your Secretary of State or the state legislature have acted in a way that's illegal, that's in conflict with either laws passed by the legislature or by the federal or state constitution, and you've got evidence to support those claims, you could go to court. So I don't view the increase in election litigation over the years as necessarily a bad thing. I don't necessarily think that all lawsuits that have been filed over this 3-year period or have strong grounds to them. But I do think that courts do have an important role to play in our election system, in making sure that our elections are conducted in compliance.
And just to follow up on that, and I always make the point to my students when I'm teaching American government that there is ambiguity in laws, and there's ambiguity in the Constitution, right? Parts of the Constitution, most of the Constitution, it doesn't say what due process is. It doesn't have a footnote that says due process means this, right? You can look at any law and you can find ambiguity, right? And the same goes for election laws, right? There's things that are just not mentioned, or they're really vague, or they're open to interpretation. So of course we should have places where people can go to seek relief. And in fact, some cases people have been successful in challenging things related to elections. The concern I have is, as Dan mentioned, you need to have evidence based in fact about the claims that you're bringing. And it's concerning when people come forward with cases where they're based largely on hearsay, right? Those are not going to get very far.
Reminder again that if you have any audience questions, just wave your card, someone will come and get it for you. To expand on that, can you, either of you speak, and obviously there's a lot of challenges that are still ongoing and will probably continue to be ongoing for quite some time, but are there any challenges that stand out in your mind that you could talk about how they worked out over any recent election, I guess?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, challenges to, whether it's doubt about, how ballots are properly cast, voters' procedures, are there any kind of election cases that, or challenges that stand out in your minds?
I mean, there have been hundreds of them over the years, and I'm not sure there are any in particular. I guess I'll go back to the 2008 election, maybe with the answer to that question. Where there were lawsuits brought by both sides. I was still in Ohio at the time, where it was a swing state in that election. The McCain campaign brought a lawsuit having to do with certain absentee ballots that it thought should be counted, even though there was a box that wasn't checked, which was really easy for voters to miss. I joined an amicus brief in that case, saying those ballots ought to be counted, and that was a position that wound up winning before the Ohio Supreme Court. There was another case brought by the Obama campaign. This was a case having to do with the counting of certain provisional ballots that were cast in the wrong precinct but the right polling place. So a lot of places, we got multiple polling places, like the gym or something like that, where you go into it, and sometimes poll workers direct people to the wrong table. And there was a case that was brought, I don't know if it was by the Obama campaign or by its allies, about the counting of those provisional ballots. My general predilection is
I think those ties ought to be decided in favor of the voter where the law is ambiguous, that wherever possible, when voters are at least acting in good faith, we should try and count their ballots. That's my own view on the subject in most cases.
We've got an audience question about the ERIC system. And the question is just, do you feel that the ERIC system is flawed?
I haven't been following this that closely, so maybe I might want to ask one of the panelists.
That is fair.
Yeah, I mean, I know a bit about the ERIC system, which is a system for verifying registrations across states. I mean, I've heard good things, I know there's some critics as well, but I don't want to go beyond my level.
I'll just give one example, not about the ERIC system, but about state legislator I interacted with. So I did a panel on EW Green Bay with a Republican and Democrat, and the Republican state senator said, you know, I fully believed that there were people who were not registered who voted in the last election. I genuinely believe that. So I asked the election commission for the data, and they gave it to me. There wasn't a single person who voted who wasn't registered. Right? He actually went and looked at the data, which is what you need to do if you're making claims about how elections are conducted. I thought that was really important for him to say that. Like, I genuinely believe this. I went and got the data. Not a single person was on the list. If you're making claims about elections, you can go get the data in a lot of cases. Right? You can observe elections. You can get the information from the Elections Commission. So I thought it was really important for somebody to say, like, I believe this. I went and looked, and it didn't verify it, but I thought was true.
Can you talk a little bit more about, you mentioned, you know, so much of this is done at the state level. How does state law intersect with federal law, and how do states interact with the federal government when it comes to election administration?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I mentioned earlier that most of the law that governs elections in the United States is made at the state level, right? It's different from most other countries, which tend to have more centralized authorities. We do have a couple of federal agencies with some responsibilities over elections. One of them is the Federal Election Commission that is primarily responsible for overseeing our system of limitations that exist on contributions and so on to campaign regulations on political action committees and so on. That's a bipartisan commission that when fully staffed consists of 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. There's also a commission, also a bipartisan commission called the Election Assistance Commission that was created in 2002 by the Help America Vote Act, which was a bipartisan piece of legislation enacted after the 2000 election, which revealed all sorts of problems, including problems in voting machines, registration, provisional ballots. So, the Election Assistance Commissions, it really doesn't have a lot of power. Its main job is really to dole out federal money that's provided for election system improvements. It has some narrow regulatory power, but it doesn't really have a lot of teeth to it. So most of the real work actually gets done at the state and local level, right? Each state has a chief election official, usually a single person, sometimes it's a commission or another kind of body that oversees elections and is responsible for statewide implementation of election laws. But then a lot of the real work really gets done at the local level by people like the ones you heard from earlier and maybe hearing from earlier, I guess. And that's where a lot of the real work gets done, and it's dependent on all of you, on people who are willing to volunteer as poll workers, the hard work of actually running things in the polling place, and then by people who are professional, but in some places like Dane County, where I live, Milwaukee County, you may have a significant number of people who are running elections, but there are lots of smaller towns and counties across the United States that may just have one part-time person working for them. So there's a wide variation in how elections are run, but the bottom line is elections in the United States are mostly a matter of state law.
Got another audience question before we wrap this one up. Just a pretty practical implementation question, you know, a court makes a ruling in an election law case. Can you talk about how that ruling is then actually enforced?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, court makes a ruling. This is a problem with court rulings generally. It doesn't necessarily mean they're followed, right? There are basically two kinds of remedies you can get in a court case. Right? I'm oversimplifying. Two basic kinds of relief are damages. Your usual court case, like a car accident or something, you're suing for damages. That's not usually what's sought in elections and voting rights cases. The usual remedy that's sought in elections and voting rights cases is what we call injunctive relief, right? A court order that you have to do something, like count certain ballots, or stop doing something, like don't enforce this rule that works completely violates the law. Sometimes those who are subject to court orders don't follow. That it happens quite often. When there's an injunction, what can you do? You can go in and seek an order that the defendant is in contempt of courts, and that defendant can be required to pay some additional sanction, a monetary sanction, sometimes something else, if they're held in contempt of court. But injunctions with the possibility of being held in contempt of court, that is the usual relief in elections and voting rights cases.
I guess that's a problem all courts have, right? I once saw Justice Kennedy say, all we have is what we write. Courts don't have a bureaucracy. They don't have agencies to implement things. They have no military. They have no budget beyond their pay and their staff pay. They're relying on people to comply or other branches to move things forward. And so I guess that's always a challenge for courts, right? They don't have the power of the pen or the power of the sword as other branches do. And so they have to rely on the things that they write and people complying with them.
I know we're wrapping up. I just want to say the final thing. I think the organizers and sponsors of this event at the beginning, I want to close by just thanking all of you, because you all wouldn't be here if you didn't care about our election and our democracy. So thanks to you all for caring.
Thanks to Dan and Aaron for their participation in this. And next up, we move on to the cybersecurity portion. So Dave Schroeder has a bio full of a lot of words that I don't exactly know what they mean. He's a cyber expert, serves on the board of directors of the Wisconsin Security Research Consortium, the Wisconsin Information Security Center. Served as a cyber warfare officer in the Wisconsin Army National Guard, and previously served as an information warfare officer, cryptologic warfare officer, and space cadre in the U.S. Navy. Once again, this is our final portion of the evening, so please get your questions ready. We'll try to get in again as many as we can from the audience. Wave them up in the air. Folks are keeping an eye out on that. Let's just start with, can election systems in Wisconsin be hacked?
Oh, you gave me the easy question.
Yeah.
And put me up here by myself too. So any system can be compromised. Any electronic system, any process, any system that runs software, any system that relies on humans to interact with it can be compromised. So everyone who has a computer or a smartphone who's ever had a password changed out from under them, or had malware installed on your computer, or lost control of one of your accounts, knows that systems can be compromised. Governments make a practice out of developing ways to exploit other systems of adversary governments. So, the United States has cyber warfare capabilities. So do many other nations in the world: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, just to name a few. And this is another domain of warfare. So I'm speaking about this a little bit in the military context, but to get back to the question, election systems can be compromised, and the only defense that we have against it is the systems and processes and rules and procedures that we put in place to try to secure them and ensure that they are not, taken control of by a bad actor or an adversary. I think one of the advantages that we have in the United States and in Wisconsin is just how distributed our elections are. There aren't really a lot of central places you can go if you're a bad actor or someone who's seeking to influence or alter the outcome of an election, which is what we always think about, right? When we're thinking about like someone hacking an election, someone's going to go in there and change the results. Someone's going to go into an election machine and change how it operates, or change a vote that's been cast for one candidate to another, or invalidate your vote, or any number of other things, or that votes for a candidate are going to be improperly inserted during the process of tabulation, or when the results are announced. These are all the things that we think about. I think that it would be false to say that it is impossible to hack, so to speak, an election. But what I can say is that elections in this country, and that includes in Wisconsin, are treated as national critical infrastructure on the same level as the power grid, at the same level as the other systems that we consider critical to the safety and security of the United States. And that means that they have a lot of best practices and controls and rules, some of which are promulgated at the state level, that determine how these systems are operated. And I would also put in one more comment on this kind of open question, which is that our elections have always been able to be compromised, even before computers and before technology. But we trust that the officers and officials that are responsible for implementing the election are doing the right thing, that are counting the votes properly, that are only allowing one person, one vote, that are ensuring that the vote that you cast legally at the polling place or in the mail, absentee, or whatever the case may be, is counted properly, and isn't offset by another vote that has been counted or cast improperly or illegally. And I think that's something that we can all agree on here, is that when we conduct an election as a society, we expect that our votes are going to be counted and counted properly, and that they're not going to be offset by bad actors.
And certainly we know, we hear about attempts to interfere in elections and city government, all kinds of things. And we, the public, hear about it after the fact, after we hear, just recently, the state court system, had a cyber attack on it. We hear after the fact, no problems, or X amount of data was breached, what have you. Can you walk us through what's happening before we, the public, find out, this attempt was made, and here's how we found out about it, and here's how we dealt with it?
Sure. So in general, with just speaking in generalities here with a cyber attack, there's some bad actor, whether it's a criminal organization, whether it is a hacktivist, a hobbyist, or a nation state actor, because that happens too. It happens quite regularly, and it happens quite regularly that nation states are seeking to target government entities at not just the federal level, but the state and local level in the United States. Sometimes the strategy is that they want to be found. Sometimes they don't, if it's for purposes of espionage, like with SolarWinds and Russia. They might sit in a system for months or years undetected, because the purpose is to exfiltrate information. If the purpose is to cast doubt or sow distrust or chaos or steal data or not really care about being protected, a lot of times the first indication that someone will have that something's been compromised is, within the IT organization of whatever that entity is. And, what might seem simple and straightforward, to us on the outside often is extremely complex and involved, as far as investigating what actually has taken place and figuring out what's been lost, what's been changed, what's been affected, what's gone, what's gone missing. And it's something that most organizations, depending on whether it's public or private or a government entity, actually wants to figure out at least some level of ground truth before that, before it's announced, to the public, and usually we find out about it in a news article or something like that. But that's a key element of transparency with cybersecurity in general, is that when you have something that's been compromised, especially something that is as critical as our elections, the public deserves to know about it, and the public deserves to know what is being done to address it. And these are always going to be cat and mouse games between the folks who work on securing our election systems and administering our elections, or securing any system, any electronic system at all, and bad actors who have various different motivations for, they have different reasons why they're doing these things. And one of those reasons, in the context of elections, is to cause us to doubt the process, is to cause us to lose faith and trust in the process, so that at the end of the day, if there's a close election, or if there's a question about anything related to the process, there are forces out there, and some of them are foreign, who, and this is not an issue of politics, because I submit that in every election since 2000, speaking of Bush versus Gore, there are a not insignificant number of Americans who believe that the election was stolen, and that whoever won the election was not legitimately holding office. And you'd probably go back and say, well, even before 2000, there's people who believe that. I'm sure there were, but with the rise of the internet and the rise of social media, and the rise of the ability for information to travel to every one of us instantaneously, in images, sound bites, very compelling narratives can be built around a lot of different things, some based in fact and some not based in fact, that wind up getting us to distrust one of our most sacred processes that we have as American citizens. And I think that is a dangerous place for us to be. This is something that's not easily solvable without us all talking with each other and working with each other and taking part in the process. So I realize not everyone can go out and be a poll worker, not everyone has time to go out and be an observer, but that's one way to do it. There's not one of us. There's not one of us in this room today, tomorrow, ever, or ever in our history that can lay eyes on every single part of the process of the administration of an election. You're not going to be able to personally count every vote in your own city, county, state. You're not going to be able to conduct recounts independently on your own. And so we, at some level, need to trust that the people administering our elections are doing it in good faith, even when it's imperfect, even when there are questions. And those questions deserve to be addressed. I'm not saying that we brush them away. I'm not saying we say, oh, this concern is invalid. But we're approaching a time where with AI tools, not just for text, but for image generation and for video generation, in our lifetimes, you're going to see not just faked photos, but faked closed circuit TV that purports to show evidence of something happening that didn't actually happen. How are we going to confront that as a society if, we always hear people talk about, hey, I trust what I see with my own eyes. And we can't even trust that anymore. All we're left with is our trust in one another as a society, as citizens.
We are in the final few minutes here, so if you do have a question, please raise your hand up so we can take a look at those, but we've got this decentralized system in Wisconsin. What safeguards do exist here specific to Wisconsin? Why should people trust? You talk about trust, why should people trust?
Sure. So I'll try to answer this one quickly so we can actually get to some questions. So there are, through the Election Assistance Commission, there are a number of best practices and actual assistance that end up getting from the federal government, like CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, DHS, FBI Cyber, other agencies at the federal level, down, that essentially end up being implemented as guidance on election systems in Wisconsin. That's anything from how people have their email systems set up at a county or municipal level, securing their local websites, securing websites where election results, even unofficial results, are announced, securing the actual election system themselves, securing the processes by which certain designated individuals can access systems like WISVote, where a lot of the related registration database and other election processes and districts and things like that are administered in Wisconsin. There's a lot of control around these processes. Again, they're not perfect, but there's a lot of people of all types of political persuasions, nonpartisan, experts across the board who are responsible for implementing these controls and really doing the best we can to secure these systems. And I think that, again, the distributed nature of things helps us out here, because there's not one place where a bad actor can go in and break everything. And chances are, even if they get in somewhere, they're going to be detected by some of these processes that happen after the fact, like statutory required audits, things of that nature.
I'm going to try to combine two questions here because we've gotten a couple questions just about alternatives to the electronic system that we have. So, whether it's moving to a hand count, to paper ballots, to saying you can only vote in person, with strict exceptions. What could some of those alternatives look like? Are they superior or inferior to the system we have?
Well, I guess that's not really a cyber question per se, but I mean, I think that, the reality is we live in a world where we are so dependent on information systems and the information ecosystem that we're all in. And I've seen, a lot of the calls out there, like, why don't we just go back to paper ballots? And I think that's a question that, has to be left up to legislatures, because legislatures certainly could say that elections would be conducted only on paper. Now, is that more secure? Is that going to solve the problems that we have with trust? I don't think so, because when it comes down to something that is more a partisan nature of doubt about the results of the election, what we're going to see happen in the cyber realm that still does exist, like social media and the information space that we exist in and consume information, and things that are getting in front of your eyeballs all the time, those claims are then going to shift to ballots being improperly cast, or ballot stuffing, or overvoting, or illegal voting, even if they're on paper. And those concerns are just going to morph. So it still comes back to trust, and I think you'd be hard pressed to get a lot of state legislatures to depart from automated systems and computerized or partially computerized systems to help administer elections.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. And really appreciate you all being here. I'm going to bring Nathan Stock up to close us up. And I'm going to set him up with a question, because I don't want to ignore this question. It was one of the first ones we got, and I know there was chatter on social media and elsewhere asking this, just why this program is happening now at this time so close to a key election. So I was not involved in the organization, but I'd like to keep that up for Nathan to answer as he wraps us up here.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks very much, Jessica. I want to take a moment to thank Thompson Center for organizing this with the Carter Center, University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, all of you for hosting us tonight. So for the Carter Center, we've been working in the United States on questions of conflict resolution and democracy since the summer of 2020. And we're concerned, and share the concern that was echoed here about this decline in trust, right? There's data that Gallup surveys Americans on, and asks Americans a battery of questions every year since the Nixon administration about who and what we trust. And if you look at those polling results going back to like 1974, Americans' trust in our institutions, banks, newspapers, media, trust in our fellow Americans, all this has been declining for decades. So I would argue that the controversy regarding the legitimacy of our electoral processes that's come up in the last few years, in a way, that is an expansion of an existing national crisis of mistrust into a new domain, mistrust of our elections. And this is corrosive to our democratic republic. Ultimately, you can't keep having a democracy if people don't think the results of elections are legitimate. And if you can't go back to the old ways where at some point, after you've had your day in court, folks who lose shake hands with the other person, move on gracefully. Losing that is very, very dangerous. So the Carter Center is trying to do our small part to get out in front of that. With Justice Orr, with Bob, and a colleague in North Carolina, we ran a whole bunch of town hall meetings all around the state like this back in the fall before the 2022 election. We decided to do one up here, do two up here once we confirmed that the Thompson Center wanted to work with us. But in all cases, the idea is similar. We wanted to provide a platform for our election administrators, state officials, county clerks, folks who run the mechanics of the system to explain how it works. Because it's not surprising that the average voter doesn't know off the top of their head exactly what happens to their ballot. That makes sense, right? So our hope is that in sharing information, creating a platform to come out and have a civil conversation about these issues, we can play a small role in increasing confidence in this system that is so critical to our democratic republic. So the last thing I want to say, besides a huge thank you to all of our panelists, to the university and the Thompson Center, is just that, as Bob suggested, for the Carter Center, we hope this will be the beginning of our work in Wisconsin. We'll be looking for fellow Americans, Wisconsinites, left, right, and center, Democrat, Republican, and everything in between. If you're interested in engaging with us, engaging in peaceful dialogue and talking about elections and trust and democracy, please see me after the event, and I'd be happy to talk about that. And last but not least, thank all of you for coming out on a Monday night to support our democratic republic. Really appreciate it. Thank you.